This is a talk in two parts. First is a short recap of what we do and how we got to where we are, and then the second half is something we've already been talking about for 15 minutes. So, Runscope, what is Runscope? First of all, we were founded in 2013. My co-founder and I, Frank, are both ex-Twilio. In between Twilio and Runscope, I went to IFT, worked with a lot of APIs, saw a lot of API problems, felt like there should be a lot of better API tools. We raised some money, and we're currently 13 people, and we're over at near third in market. Recently, we've added a couple of key members of the team. So Neil, who is here, just joined us from Mastery as the VP of Developer Relations. So community building for developer communities is a huge part of what we do. It's what I did at Twilio. It's what Neil did at Mastery. And so we're really excited to have him on board to continue to help us reach more and more developers. Robert is a senior engineer who joined us out of Prezi. But what's interesting about Robert is we heavily relied on this open source JavaScript interpreter written in Go called Otto. And this became a really core feature for us. And Robert made that, so we were really lucky to bring him over to join us to work on that as well. Unfortunately, this hire your dependencies doesn't scale very well, so we're glad this one worked out. All right, so Runscope helps app developers and just developers in general solve API problems fast. What does that actually look like day to day? Well, we help you log, monitor, and measure your API usage, logging to see detailed logs of all the calls going back and forth between your apps and the APIs you depend on, monitoring to keep an eye on them on an ongoing basis to make sure they're up and correct, and then measure to look for aggregate patterns and performance problems for the APIs you use. More pithy version of that is we do API performance monitoring, generally from the consumption side, but more and more we're seeing even API providers who we've largely ignored continue to use the product. One of those tools is the monitoring tool that we have. 25,000 developers so far in the first 18 months have signed up to use Runscope. Here are some of our customers. Please don't take any pictures or tweet that. I'm not going to say their names, so we can skip that part in the video. But the two at the top are in particular are very good customers for us that we will be talking about more. As an example, one of those two, this is how they use our Runscope Radar monitoring tool to monitor their API. So they have a very big public API that a lot of their internal apps depend on, a lot of their mobile apps. And they don't actually monitor that public-facing API with our tool. What they do is they actually have a bunch of back-end private APIs that feed that public API. If any one of these services goes down, then the public API is essentially broken in some regard. And so what they do is they run Runscope against those back-end and private APIs to verify that they're up, that they're meeting their performance SLAs, and that they're returning correct data. They do this with a combination of both our 9 locations in the cloud, our 9 service regions. 7 of those are in Amazon, 2 are in Rackspace. But they also do that with our on-premise agent, which allows you to test and monitor your APIs behind the firewall, as well as those that are available on public DNS. So if you go to our website, you'll see this diagram. If you dig deep enough, and this shows how we allow you to run an agent on your infrastructure to test private APIs as well as public APIs. So this is a chart of our weekly usage for Radar test runs. So we launched that just about a year ago at Amazon reInvent 2013. And we had a good first few months there where we learned a lot about what people were looking for. We originally pitched this as a back-end service testing tool for mobile app developers. But what happened was that people kept finding it and kept wanting to use it for just general purpose monitoring of APIs because there was a complete lack of tooling in the API monitoring space. So a lot of people were trying to repurpose Pingdom for that. Pingdom isn't very smart when it comes to APIs. It makes a lot of dumb checks against your APIs. And there was really a big gap in the market for something that was more tailored to APIs for handling things like OAuth or multi-step workflows or checking JSON for complicated patterns to make sure that it's correct. This summer, we added those 9 service regions. We went from 1 to 8. We've added 1 since. And you can see there that since then, usage has really taken off. So what that says to me is that people really wanted a globally distributed monitoring tool. And once we caught up with that in features, that we've sort of really hit this sweet spot right now where the market is resonating with the product we have available. One of the things that people have asked us since the very first pitch meeting we ever had with investors is how are you going to get developers to sign up for Runscope? So at Twilio, I was really lucky that when I joined, it was still small, but they had a very good product, and they already had some of the initial philosophies going for how to sign up developers. And we were lucky to really run with that and turn it into a much bigger number. But telling investors I'm just going to do what I did at Twilio wasn't quite enough. I mean, it worked, but you need something more tactical than that. So in lieu of having a giant event budget like Twilio did, we had to find other ways to get developers to sign up. So going back in history, there was a site called Hurl. Does anybody know Hurl or recognize this screenshot? One person. I mean, the whole crowd. Two. Hurl was really, really instrumental in me starting Runscope, and I didn't kind of realize it till later. So this was started by Leah Culver and Chris Wanstroth as just a way to make HTTP requests through a simple web-based interface. And we would use this at Twilio all the time. Like, we use this for support constantly because we needed a way to show people how the Twilio API worked, but curl was largely out of the question for helping a lot of those people. We use this so much at Twilio that I actually acquired it while I was there. I paid for it with a credit card, and I put it on an expense report, and then later asked for forgiveness when I got in trouble for making Twilio's first acquisition via credit card and an expense report. But the Twilio support team continued to use it, and the evangelism team continued to use it there even after I left. Well, while I was also at Twilio, another site came along called RequestBin, which was made by Jeff Lindsay, who coined the term webhook. And this was another sort of instrumental site for us. This was something that got us thinking about how to make APIs more visible, and was something that I heavily used again at Twilio, because very webhook-based, trying to illustrate that to a potential customer was very tricky sometimes. So these two sites were really heavily used. In fact, tons of API documentation across the internet links to these, particularly RequestBin. So you can see MailChimp, Stripe, and SendGrid here. This is just one of many. I can show you the referral logs now. The problem was we went and built a whole bunch of inspection tools for APIs, and they were great, and they were awesome. And we went to API providers. I think I emailed all 3 of these and said, hey, we've got this great, powerful tool. It's like RequestBin on steroids. You should link to it. And they all said, nah, we already linked to RequestBin. Why would we link to Runscope? Because there was really 3 things. One, RequestBin and Hurl.it had no sign up. They did one thing really well. There was not a lot of things to understand. They solved that one problem really well, and they were free. Runscope was the opposite of this. You had to sign up. It did a lot of things really well, and it was eventually not free if you used a certain amount of it, and so it felt very commercial. So they felt like they were pitching for another startup, which is not what they wanted, right? So we couldn't replace the existing links, so we acquired the targets. Instead of trying to get them to update their links, we just went back to Twilio, and we went to Jeff Lindsay, and we said, hey, you're not maintaining these anymore. How would you like us to take them over and remove you from getting all the complaints when they go down? We'll make them stable. And they both said, sure. And thankfully, they said sure for free. So we acquired both of those sites for free. So this got us really hooked on the idea of what we sort of coined later as a community project. So as you can see here, we've rebranded Hurl.it to feel more like a Runscope thing. We've put an unobtrusive sort of ad on the bottom for what we do that goes down a little bit further. We've added some features. We've basically made sure they stay up. We did this with RequestBin as well, sort of rebranding. We also built a couple of our own. So I think that's the next slide. So here are the 3 that we built that we still currently operated. There were also 2 more that we built that we've since given away because as experiments they failed and other people wanted to run them. So we did that instead. But these are the big 3, Hurl.it and RequestBin being by far the most popular ones. Hurl.it actually, I don't know if I should admit this, gets more traffic every month than Runscope.com does. So it's an extremely popular utility for making HTTP requests. RequestBin is slightly lower than that. We also, sort of in parallel to this, thought, well, we can't buy them all, or we would if we could, but not everyone will sell to us. So we actually have a suite of a couple other ones that we just sponsor. So the sponsors levels vary on some of these. From most cases, it's just a link that says sponsored by Runscope. We either pay for the hosting or the SSL certificate or some other piece of it. API changelog is the one that we built that we handed off to somebody else. And JSON generator is an interesting one. That's our newest one because we didn't pay for a link. We actually paid to get our retargeting tag planted on the site. So that lets us now run ads against that audience, and that site gets roughly the same amount of traffic as RequestBin does every month. So now we have another huge audience that we can do for retargeting, which leads me to retargeting. So the referrals, like the just organic referrals from these sites, was really good, and we got a lot of signups from that, and that was sort of our initial boost. But simultaneously, we were playing around with a lot of retargeting stuff, and we dropped our tag on all of these sites. And what we've seen in the year plus since we've done that is that our community projects, between direct organic referrals and retargeting, refer about 33% of our signups, for an average cost per acquisition for a signup for retargeting at about $2. And on the whole, I consider this roughly like free signups. So we have had a really good run of success with this. So we are constantly on the lookout for new community projects. I feel I may have some other bidders now against me on a lot of these projects, but we were just sitting down before negotiating to take over another one. We'll build them when it makes sense, but we're always on the lookout for additional community projects that we can help developers solve a problem and eventually lead them to water and Runscope and hopefully healthier APIs. You can see our community page at runscope.com/community, and that is all I have.